Hello everyone. I'm really glad you're here tonight. I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The triangle in the sky. Back in August of 2023, my wife and I had taken a short vacation to an Airbnb in Hatch, Utah. We'd chosen the location specifically for its elevation and serenity, hoping to disconnect from the noise of daily life. The house we stayed in didn't have air conditioning, but given the elevation in the time of year, the temperature was surprisingly comfortable. The landscape was peaceful, and the skies were some of the clearest I had ever seen. We both love stargazing, so our first night there we stepped outside with my GoPro and phone to take some pictures of the heavens, surrounded by the soft rustling of trees and the chirping of crickets, completely absorbed in the majestic, undisturbed night sky. While we stood quietly gazing upward, my wife suddenly pointed to what looked like a small satellite drifting slowly across the stars. At first I thought nothing of it. We often see satellites and planes at night, and I even started recording. But then, to our astonishment, the single point of light split into 3, forming a triangular shape, and then it kept expanding, more light branching off from the triangle until there were 7 bright orbs hovering in a symmetrical triangle formation. But it wasn't just the formation that stunned us. It was the part of the sky inside the triangle that truly unsettled me. That section of the sky looked frozen, almost like a static screenshot, while the rest of the stars around it continued twinkling normally. It reminded me of the Predator movie, where his cloaking tech distorts the scenery behind him, like something was masking the sky in that section. For a few minutes, this triangle of light silently moved across the sky, taking with it this frozen patch of space. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it either shot upward at an impossible speed or shrank into nothingness. Either way, it was gone. That's when we noticed something else. A complete and unnatural silence had fallen. No wind, no insects, no distant animal calls. The world around us had gone still. We were so stunned by the shift in atmosphere that we quietly gathered our things and went inside for the night. Though we were shaken, we didn't talk much about it then. We were still processing what we had just seen. The photos and footage we had taken showed the beautiful night sky, but unsurprisingly, there was no sign of the mysterious lights or the triangular anomaly. A few hours later, while getting ready for bed, I stepped out onto the porch again to try a long exposure setting I discovered on my GoPro. It was still, silent, and a little eerie, that kind of silence that presses down on your chest. As I stood there adjusting the settings, I heard something that made me freeze in place. A whistle, soft, low, and deliberate. Not the kind of random whistle someone might let out while walking, but something that felt aimed, intent. I stood there, listening. Another whistle followed, a little closer this time. Now, I'm not one for superstition, but something about it just didn't sit right. I'd heard stories, warnings even, about never returning a whistle in the dark. I didn't want to find out what happened if you did. I walked back inside without taking another photo, told my wife what I'd heard, and we nervously laughed it off. We double-checked that all the doors were locked. Because the house didn't have air conditioning, we had to leave the windows open to keep cool. As we drifted off to sleep, the earlier events tugged at the back of our minds, like an invisible thread left uncut. A while later, I think it was around 1 a.m, my wife shook me awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. I sat up, listening. That's when we both heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, followed by heavy breathing. It sounded like something large, possibly a bear, was right outside our window on the porch. The growl wasn't loud, but it was incredibly bass-heavy. We could hear slow, heavy footsteps pacing across the porch, the kind of sound that makes your stomach drop. We rushed to wake our friends, flipped on all the lights, and hurried to check the porch, but there was nothing. Not a single footprint in the dust or the soft mud that surrounded the house. The air was heavy with something we couldn't explain, like the feeling of being watched, studied. Our friends hadn't heard or seen anything, not even the lights in the sky earlier that night. They chalked it up to overactive imaginations, but we knew what we had heard, what we had seen, and more importantly, what we had felt. Nothing else strange happened for the rest of our trip, but the sense of unease lingered like a thin film we couldn't quite wash off. We talked about it on the drive home, but never really reached a satisfying conclusion. It wasn't until about a month later that something truly disturbing happened. We were in our kitchen, just going about our usual evening routine. I was chopping vegetables, and my wife was stirring a pot on the stove. Then she suddenly stopped, staring out the window. There, perched on the backyard fence, was an owl. It wasn't moving, just sitting there, staring into the house. Its large, dark eyes seemed almost too human at the time. I didn't know about the connection between owl sightings and alien abduction experiences, but I've read about it since. Something about how owls are often seen before or after people report encounters. Maybe they scream memories, or maybe something else entirely. My wife was visibly shaken. She couldn't shake the feeling that we'd seen something we weren't supposed to, and now something or someone was checking up on us. We've never experienced missing time or anything overtly terrifying, but it's the small things that keep gnawing at the back of our minds. Was it just coincidence? Or were we chosen for something beyond our comprehension? Since that night, she's been reluctant to stargaze like she used to. For her, it's no longer a peaceful experience. The vastness of the sky now feels like something that might be watching back. For me, it's the opposite. I've become obsessed in a way. I keep looking up hoping to see those lights again, to make sense of what we witnessed. I've read countless stories online of people seeing triangular formations in the sky, of strange silences, eerie whistling in the dark. It's made me realize we're not alone in this. Maybe these things happen more often than we know, but people just don't talk about them. Or maybe they forget, as if something wants them to forget. I still think about the triangle in the sky and how it carried a piece of the night with it, frozen and strange. I think about the way the world just paused, as if something had pulled the plug on reality. And I think about that whistle, the heavy footsteps, and the owl on our fence. It feels like we brushed against something vast, something watching. I don't know what it was. I don't even know if I want to know, but I share this story because I need to know I'm not the only one. I need to believe that someone out there has seen the same triangle, heard the same silence, and felt that same shift in the world, where everything changes, but nothing looks different. Story 2. The scratching in the tent. We had gone camping near Laguna Mountain in California, just the three of us. Me, my wife, and my stepdaughter. It was a quiet spot, tucked far enough off the main road that we were surrounded by stillness, undisturbed by passing cars or the usual bustle of trails. The road we turned off from led to a secluded little clearing that seemed like the perfect place to settle for the night. No other campers nearby, no hikers passing through, just the rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of night insects echoing across the crisp mountain air. It was the kind of place people dream about when they picture nature at its most peaceful. At first, everything about the trip felt exactly as we hoped, relaxing, restorative, calm. We set up our tent late in the afternoon and spent the early evening making dinner over a small fire, then telling stories while sipping hot drinks. As the fire dwindled and the stars emerged above us, we tucked ourselves in and listened to the ambient night settle around the tent. It was around midnight when we first heard it, the slow, deliberate sound of something scratching against the tent. At first, we thought it was an animal, maybe a curious raccoon or a squirrel poking around, but this wasn't a frantic or random sound. It had rhythm, slow, deliberate, too careful to be a critter. It scraped across the paracord strips that held the tent to the ground, almost like long nails sliding across taut wire. I looked at my wife, and she was already sitting up, her face tense in the low light. We didn't say much, just listened, waiting for the noise to come again, and it did. The same methodical scratching sound, moving slightly along the edge of the tent. Animals don't move like that. We'd heard plenty of squirrels and small creatures scurrying earlier in the night. That quick, hasty pitter-patter of paws through grass or over our supplies. But this sound was different. The thing that bothered me most was that there was no sound of approach or retreat. No leaves rustling, no twigs snapping, no footfalls. Just the sound of something scratching. Almost as if it had appeared right beside us, from nowhere. The silence between the scratches only deepened our unease. We waited, breathing carefully, trying not to make a sound. Then, around 2 a.m., the noise came again. Only this time it had moved closer, from one corner of the tent to another. It now scraped directly near where our heads were resting. I could feel the vibration through the tent floor, as if it were coming through the paracord, taut and stretched like guitar strings. The resonance was subtle but unmistakable. Something was making contact with the structure of our tent. We both sat frozen, caught between curiosity and a rising sense of dread. We wanted to look out, to shine a light and see what it was, but something in us said no, stay still, stay quiet. I whispered that maybe it was nothing, trying to comfort her, but she wasn't convinced, neither was I. The stillness outside felt oppressive now, like we were wrapped in more than just nylon and mesh, like something was closing in around us. It wasn't until much later, as we lay there in anxious silence, that we heard a faint third occurrence of the sound. It was fainter, shorter, maybe only a second or two, and it was unclear whether it was real or just our frayed nerves inventing noise in the dark. I couldn't be sure, but my wife said she felt the vibration again. At that point, we were both on edge and couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. We just lay there, listening, watching the shadows on the tent walls. By morning, the forest seemed normal again. Birds chirped, the sun filtered through the trees. Nothing seemed out of place. No signs of intrusion, no tracks, no torn fabric or damage to the tent. But that absence of evidence didn't feel reassuring. It felt like the kind of mystery meant to stay hidden. We tried to explain it away. Maybe a bird landed on a guy line, or a branch shifted in the wind, but it hadn't been windy, and the movement had felt too specific, too intentional. We walked the perimeter, checked the cords, checked for prints in the dirt. Nothing, not a twig displaced, and I kept coming back to one troubling thought. If an animal had made that noise, where was the sound of it coming and going? What chilled me more was the possibility that it wasn't bound by the rules of footsteps or rustling leaves. What if it hadn't walked at all? What if it floated? That thought clung to me longer than I cared to admit. I even tried to dismiss it myself, tell myself I was being silly, letting fear spin tales. But in the quiet moments afterward, when the world was still again, it crept back in, like an echo in my mind. We spent the rest of the day like tourists again, hiking and laughing and making meals. But at night, when we lay back in the tent, every tiny sound became amplified. The forest no longer felt like it was resting peacefully. It felt like it was watching. We didn't hear the scratching again, not that night or the one after. But the silence between us grew thicker, unspoken questions rising to the surface. What had we heard? Why had it moved with such precision? Why had there been no sign of it in the dirt? And if it was something natural, why had it affected us so deeply? It's easy to laugh off these things when they happen to someone else, but when you're the one lying awake in the dark, waiting for something to brush against your sanctuary, even if it never returns, the fear becomes real. It's no longer about whether it was real in a scientific sense. It was real to us. We lived it, and it changed the way we feel about sleeping in the wild. Even now, long after we've packed up that tent and stored away our gear, that memory remains. It comes back whenever I hear a creak in the house or a tap at the window during a storm. I still enjoy nature, I still love the woods, but there's a part of me now that listens just a little harder to the silence, that believes not everything lurking in the forest makes a sound you can hear. Some things just arrive. Some things don't need footsteps. And some things only come when the world has fallen completely still, when even the wind holds its breath. I don't know what scratched our tent that night, but I know it came close enough to touch and quiet enough to haunt us forever. Story 3. Sarah's Smile. When I was a child growing up in the UK, between the ages of 9 and 11, I had a best friend named Sarah. She lived just one street over, and our friendship blossomed quickly during those formative school years. We had a small group at primary school that included 2 other girls, Lauren and Ellen, but Sarah and I were inseparable, especially because of how close we lived. I often stayed over at her house on weekends, mostly because she never visited mine. My family didn't have much, and I was embarrassed about the condition of our home. Her house, by comparison, felt more put together, and I found myself drawn into her world, even when that world slowly began to show cracks I didn't yet know how to interpret. It was during these sleepovers that I began noticing things that felt off. Sarah would show me her mother's strange VHS tapes from the ATS, often with an erotic vampire theme I didn't understand at the time. I was 9. I didn't even know what I was supposed to be looking at. She would sit beside me, eyes fixated on the screen, then turn and ask, "Doesn't this make you want to do it?" I didn't even know what it was. She'd then bring out her mother's odd adult toys and hand them to me, like they were props in some game I hadn't agreed to play. Looking back now, the discomfort I felt makes complete sense. But back then, I was just a quiet, anxious kid who didn't want to lose a friend. No matter how strange her behavior became, at night, she would sing Patty Cake in a soft, eerie baby voice, sometimes right into my ear while I was trying to sleep. She'd whisper that her dolls were alive, that they were jealous of me for taking her attention away, and that they wanted to punish me. But she'd always say it with a smile, like she was just playing. And so I played along, even when it left me with nightmares that I couldn't explain to my mother. I never told anyone. At the time, it felt easier to keep quiet and admit that I felt afraid. I wanted a friend so badly that I learned to ignore the unease, to let it bury itself somewhere just under the surface. Then everything changed. The year I was attacked by a Japanese Akita. I had to undergo facial reconstructive surgery, and after that I was given medication I needed to take at school. Lauren, one of the other girls, became my escort to the nurse's office each day. We grew close, and my sleepovers started happening at her house instead. I thought it was a natural shift, but Sarah didn't. She became distant, then cold, and finally vindictive. One day, out of nowhere, she told everyone I was pregnant. I was 10. She made up wild stories, cried about it, made plans as if it were real, even convinced Ellen to tell her mum. And somehow, none of us questioned it. We were kids, and Sarah was always so convincing. After that, she escalated further. She told people she had cancer, and when I gently confronted her, knowing a lot about cancer because my aunt was battling it, she lashed out. She began stealing from me. My brand new flip phone, the pink one I adored, vanished. So did my DS Lite, my most prized possession. My mother got involved, and after confronting Lauren, the items were mysteriously returned, smashed and broken, found on the road. They said my mum didn't buy it, and deep down, neither did I. But it was easier to accept the lie than confront the truth, that Sarah had become something I didn't recognize, something dangerous. Then came the birthday party at the local pool. Sarah and I were oddly friendly again, like the good old days. I couldn't swim, never learned, and was stuck in the shallow end while everyone else laughed in the deep end. Sarah came over, offered to piggyback me so I could join them. For a moment, I forgot everything. I felt included, like she remembered the friendship we once had. But once we were out in the deep end, she began tipping me side to side. I begged her to stop, and she only laughed. Then she let go. I went under. She held me down, and all I could feel was panic. I couldn't breathe. I thrashed, desperate for air, until a lifeguard pulled me up and dragged me to the side of the pool. I never forgot the feeling of chlorine burning my eyes and nose, or the way I shook uncontrollably afterward. My eyes swelled from the reaction, and my mum had to come get me. Everyone said it was just kids playing, a misunderstanding. Sarah told me to stop being a baby and learn how to swim, but I knew. I knew that wasn't a joke. That was something else entirely. I avoided her after that. Our classmates still bounced between us, some days her friend, other days mine, but I no longer cared. I checked my distance and counted down the days until primary school ended. When we transitioned into secondary school, our class was sorted into tiers based on academic performance. Lauren, Ellen and I were placed into the top class. Sarah was not. That separation gave me space to breathe. I made new friends. For the first time in years, I felt free from Sarah's shadow, until one afternoon, walking home from school, I passed the local shop and saw her standing there blocking the path. Her tie was wrapped around her head like a bandana. She was crying. I tried to walk past her, but she lunged. Without warning, she tackled me, clawing at my neck, kneeing and elbowing me while I flailed helplessly. I had never fought anyone before. I weighed maybe 80 pounds. All I could do was grab the tie round her head and yank with all my strength. She fell, got up, and ran off crying. I walked home in stunned silence. I hadn't spoken to her in months. I had no idea why she attacked me. Weeks passed. I turned 12, used my birthday money to buy new pens for school. First period, Ellen ran up to me, pale and shaking. "Sarah brought a knife," she whispered. "She said it's for you." I laughed at first, thinking it had to be a joke. But the teachers didn't think it was. The police were called. Sarah was expelled. I never saw the knife, but I saw her eyes weeks before, full of fury. I didn't know what she planned. I still don't. She transferred to my younger sister's school and even told her the knife had been just a joke. My sister, a fighter unlike me, punched her. That was the last I heard of Sarah. Until I turned 18, she tagged me in an old class photo on Facebook. No message, just my name among 30 faces. A few months later, she sent an invitation to her birthday party. I ignored it. I didn't want to open that door again. Later I learnt she had reconnected with Lauren, which stung more than I expected. It made me wonder if Lauren had ever really been on my side at all. Had they stolen my DS together? Had it all been a game to them? The last time I saw Sarah, I was 19. I was out with my boyfriend, walking past a bus stop. She stood there watching. As soon as our eyes met, she grinned and pulled out her phone, filming me until we were out of sight. I never knew why, and I don't think I want to. Now, I'm an adult. I've processed most of this, but the memories linger, like a fog that rolls in when I least expect it. I don't hate Sarah, not anymore. I feel sorry for her. Sorry for whatever life she had behind the scenes, the one that twisted her into someone so hurtful. But I never want to see her again. I share this story not just for closure, but as a reminder that childhood friendships can hide something darker, that not all monsters lurk in forests or shadows. Some wear school uniforms. Some laugh while they pull you under. And some smile while they press record. Story 4. The Man Behind the Rack. When I was a child, probably around 7 or 8 years old, I had an experience that has stayed with me through my entire life. Even now, as a 41-year-old father, I sometimes think back to that day in the fabric store and feel a chill run through me. It's one of those memories that doesn't fade with time. I've reflected on it during quiet moments and sleepless nights, and more recently when an Amber Alert went off on my phone while I was with my daughter. That loud, jarring beeping pulled something deep from my memory, not something I had forgotten, but something I had filed away in a quiet, shadowed place, reluctant to revisit. But now that I'm older and a father myself, I understand how serious that moment really was, and how close I may have come to something terrible. Back then, we lived in a small rural town that didn't offer much beyond the basics. Every now and then my parents would take me to a nearby city about 45 minutes away for shopping trips. That day was no different. We were headed to get school clothes and other necessities, and my mum wanted to stop at her favourite fabric store, Joanne Fabrics. It was a big store, or at least it seemed that way to a kid my size. I remember walking in with my mum while my dad waited in the car. That was his usual routine. He preferred sitting outside in the sun or listening to the radio while we shopped. So I followed my mum inside, holding her hand, until we got to the racks of colourful fabrics near the entrance. She became immersed in flipping through the patterns, running her fingers over the textures and colours. I, as usual, got a little bored. I didn't wander far, just a rack or two over. I could still see her, just a few feet away, and from my little pocket between the fabric displays, I felt safe enough to look around on my own. That's when he appeared. I don't remember seeing him walk up. It was like one moment I was alone, and the next he was standing there across from me, just on the other side of the rack. He was an older man, maybe in his late 50s, with a worn coat and tired eyes. But the part that unsettled me most wasn't how he looked. It was how he made me feel. He leaned in slightly and said, "Hey there, little guy, how you doing?" I didn't answer. His voice was soft, but there was something about it that didn't feel right. Then he asked, "Where are your folks? Are you in here alone?" That's when the fear hit me. My mum was nearby, just over a few racks, but in that moment she felt very far away. He smiled and said, "Come here, I want to show you something." Then he started to move around the rack toward me. Instinct kicked in. I turned the other way, but he matched my movement, stepping around to intercept me. It was like a slow, quiet game of cat and mouse, and I was the mouse, trapped in a maze of fabric and silence. I tried to slip to the left, he did the same. I shifted to the right again, he mirrored me. His eyes never left mine, and his expression never changed. It was as though he wasn't trying to be playful or friendly. There was something darker behind his actions, something calculating. I don't remember consciously making the decision, but I suddenly screamed, "Mom, help!" My voice cut through the quiet store like a siren. My mum's head snapped up, and she rushed over immediately. The man looked up, startled, and then turned back toward me. His face changed. He raised his hands slightly and chuckled, saying, "Oh, sorry, ma'am. I was just messing around. No harm done." My mum didn't buy it. She came straight to my side, pulled me away, and gave him a look I'll never forget. He nodded at her like everything was fine, then walked quickly toward the exit and disappeared. I told her what happened as best I could, and she knelt beside me, her hands on my shoulders, and said I did the right thing by calling for her. We left the store immediately. The drive home was quiet, both of us processing what had just happened. It wasn't until years later that I truly understood what could have happened if I hadn't screamed, if I had hesitated, if my mother had been even a moment slower to respond. There was no follow-up, no news report, no investigation, no one called the police. My mother tried to keep me calm, saying that the man was probably just confused or joking. But I saw her face afterward. The way she locked all the doors. The way she looked over her shoulder leaving the parking lot. She knew it wasn't nothing. As a kid, you don't have the words to describe how you feel. But that day left an imprint, that sense of being hunted. Of being watched not with affection, but with intent. I never saw the man again. He didn't follow us. But in some ways, he's never really gone. He's always there in the back of my mind, whenever I walk into a store and see a child standing alone. Now, as a parent, I see that moment through a very different lens. The weight of it, the danger of it, the way it might have ended. That man wasn't shopping for fabric. He wasn't there to browse or kill time. He was looking for something or someone. And I believe with everything in me that if I hadn't called out, he would have tried to take me. That small moment, a few words and a few quick steps could have ended my childhood, but instead, I screamed. And that scream saved me. It taught me something important, that fear is not weakness. Sometimes, it's the only thing that keeps you alive. I've never forgotten that lesson, and I never will. Now, whenever I hear about a child gone missing, or see another Amber Alert flash across my phone, I think of the little boy I used to be, standing in that fabric store, surrounded by bulks of colour and the scent of cotton and glue, trying to make sense of why a stranger wanted me to follow him. And I think about the scream that rose from my throat, unplanned, unfiltered, and how that one sound changed everything. I don't know what he wanted, and I never want to know. But I do know this. Not every danger announces itself with thunder. Sometimes it wears a coat and a smile, and waits behind a rack of fabric in the middle of a sunny afternoon. Story 5. The Visitors in the Room. This all started the year I graduated high school, when I was living with my grandmother in a quiet neighbourhood tucked just far enough from town to be peaceful, but close enough to still hear the occasional car pass. Back then, I had no idea what sleep paralysis even was. I'd never read about it, never heard anyone mention it, and I certainly didn't know how real or frightening it could become. I didn't drink, didn't use drugs, had no health issues that I was aware of. My life at the time was simple, almost uneventful. But one night, that all changed. And when it did, the world that I had assumed was solid and predictable cracked wide open, letting something else seep through. It began late one night, as I was lying in the spare bedroom at my grandmother's house. The room was dark, lit only by the soft ambient glow of distant street lamps bleeding through the curtains. I had just started to drift off when I felt something shift inside my body. It wasn't pain exactly. It was like my limbs became heavy, like sandbags weighing down my arms and legs. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't. Panic rushed in. I thought maybe I was having a heart attack or a seizure. My chest tight, my breath short, my limbs frozen. But then my eyes opened, or at least I thought they did. I could see the room. I could hear the stillness. But I could not move. Then, out of the doorway, something entered the room. It was not a man, not in any ordinary sense. A tall figure, black as ink, more shadow than flesh, seemed to glide into the room, its outline jagged and unnatural. Its face wasn't a face at all, but a swirling, static blur, like the flicker of an old TV with no signal. It stood at the foot of the bed, unmoving, as if studying me. I could feel its presence not just in the room, but inside me, like it could hear my thoughts, feel my fear. My heart thudded against my ribs, but my body still refused to move. I wanted to scream, but my voice stayed locked behind my teeth. Then, as suddenly as it came, it vanished. I could move again. I shot upright, gasping for air, sweat dampening my shirt. I fumbled for my phone, searched the internet with shaking fingers, and that's when I first encountered the term sleep paralysis. It was a shock to learn that many others had experienced the same thing. The shadow figure, the inability to move, the overwhelming dread. They even had a name for the entity. Shadow people, and that realization, instead of calming me, only deepened the unease. Because if so many had seen the same thing, what did that say about the world we thought we knew? For weeks after, I couldn't sleep. I kept the lights on, played soft music, anything to keep the fear at bay. I thought, maybe if I didn't sleep deeply, I could avoid it. But sleep always comes eventually. And one night, at my mother's house while visiting my siblings, it returned. I was lying in bed beside my younger brother, who was still awake, playing video games on a mattress on the floor. I remember watching him, the glow of the screen reflecting off his face, and thinking that I was safe. But then that familiar sensation returned. The weight, the stillness. I tried to speak, to whisper his name, but nothing came. I was once again trapped inside my own body. The door creaked open, not physically, but in my frozen vision. and one by one, 4 shadow figures stepped inside. Each was identical to the first. Tall, black silhouettes with no features, no light reflecting off them. They gathered around the bed slowly, their movements deliberate and silent. I could feel their presence like a thick fog pressing down on my chest. My brother kept playing, unaware. The figures stood beside me, arm's length from where I lay. Then, without warning, a sound filled the room. A voice, deep and omnipresent, not coming from their mouths, but from everywhere at once. It wasn't angry. It wasn't loud, but it echoed with finality. The scene cannot be and then they disappeared. Just like that. I jolted upright, finally able to move, and looked around the room. My brother glanced over, confused. He hadn't noticed anything. For a long while I just sat there, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had happened. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I couldn't. The words they spoke echoed over and over in my head. What scene? What had I seen? What couldn't be undone? I wasn't sure if they were referring to something I'd already witnessed or something that was coming. But either way, I knew I'd been marked by that moment. That something had changed within me. Since then, I've had a few other episodes of sleep paralysis, but none like those two. In the later episodes, I didn't see anything. I just felt the pressure, the stillness. But the fear, that never left. Even now, years later, I still feel it lingering on the edge of my sleep, like a predator waiting for the right moment. I've researched sleep paralysis, read medical journals, watched documentaries. I know the scientific explanations. The brain wakes before the body, dream imagery bleeds into waking perception, hallucinations caused by REM interference. But none of that explains how so many people have seen the same figures, heard the same messages. None of it explains how I knew with absolute certainty that what I experienced wasn't just in my head. I don't know what the shadow figures are. I don't know where they come from or why they appear, but I believe they are real, and I believe they are watching. Maybe they exist in the spaces between sleep and wakefulness, where our minds are most vulnerable. Maybe they aren't of this world at all. I've often wondered if those of us who see them have something in common, something that draws their attention. I don't know, but I share my story because I need others to know they're not alone. If you've seen them too, if you've felt the weight, the paralysis, the unspoken dread, I see you. I believe you. Now I live my life as normally as I can. I go to work, spend time with my family, laugh with friends. But every night, as I turn off the light and lay down in bed, there's a small part of me that braces for their return. I've come to accept that this may be something I carry forever. Not a curse, necessarily, but a reminder that there's more to the world than we can see, that some truths exist in silence, and that once you've seen certain things, you can't unsee them. You simply learn to live with what you know, and hope, if they return, that they come only to observe. Story 6. My father's chair. In 2021 I lost my father. He was only 56 years old when he passed away. For 5 long years he had battled pulmonary fibrosis, the result of years spent working in a factory where he was exposed to paint fumes and chemicals. It had slowly scarred his lungs, making each breath more difficult, more painful. The year he died, the world was already struggling with COVID, and when he caught a bad case of bronchitis, his body simply couldn't fight anymore. When I got the call, everything inside me froze. I couldn't believe he was really gone. The man who had raised me, who had laughed at silly movies and cooked Sunday breakfast, was suddenly just a memory. And yet, what followed made me feel like maybe he hadn't gone too far after all. A few days after the funeral I had a dream, one of those dreams that feels more like an encounter than a fantasy. I saw him lying on his bed, peaceful, his face younger than I remembered it. He looked as he did in old photos, before the illness had taken its toll. He didn't speak, didn't move, He just gave me a thumbs up and smiled. But the feeling that washed over me was overwhelming. It was as though I knew with complete certainty that he was okay, that he was safe, somewhere beyond the reach of pain. When I woke up, my face was wet with tears, and my mother, who had heard me sobbing in my sleep, gently shook me awake. We sat there together, not speaking, both of us feeling the weight of absence and the warmth of something else. Something we couldn't explain. That dream comforted me, but it didn't last forever. Grief, as I learned, comes in waves, and one night, almost a year later, something else happened, something I still struggle to understand. I was staying with my mother during that time, helping her cope with the loss. They had been together for over 30 years, and his absence had carved a hollow space in her routine. I slept in her bed for a while, just to help her feel less alone. On that particular night, we were both fast asleep, the house wrapped in quiet. I began to dream again, but this time, it didn't feel like a visit. It felt like a warning. In the dream, I was standing in the living room. My father's recliner, the one he'd always called his throne, was rocking back and forth in the corner. The oxygen tank he used in his final months was hissing softly beside him. He looked frail, tired, his frame swallowed by the chair. I moved closer, but as I did, something changed. The soft cough that had once defined his breathing began to morph, becoming something else, deeper, more jagged, became a low, guttural laugh, warped and unnatural. I stepped back, whispering, "You're not my dad." And that's when I realized I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. My body wouldn't respond. I was awake now, or thought I was, but trapped in place, unable to speak or scream. It was then that something strange happened. My mother, who was asleep beside me, suddenly gasped and sat up. She said she had felt the weight of something crawling onto the bed, something that hadn't been there moments before. Her reaction was immediate and genuine, a kind of instinctual fear that mirrored my own. She reached out to me, shook me awake, and when I finally sat up, I could see that she was trembling. She looked me in the eyes and whispered, "Something just climbed into bed with us." We didn't speak for a long time. We just sat there in the dark, our backs pressed against the headboard, listening for movement. But the house was quiet. Neither of us wanted to say what we were both thinking, that whatever I had seen in my dream, whatever I had felt hovering over me in that moment of paralysis, had crossed over from my mind into something physical. That maybe it hadn't been my father in that chair, or at least not entirely. I've heard of spirits mimicking the appearances of loved ones, of entities that wear familiar faces to gain our trust, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of that dream, something that didn't belong. We both agreed to sleep with the light on after that, just for a few nights, just until the fear passed, but it never really did. After that night, neither of us mentioned it again, not in detail. We resumed our lives, went back to our routines, tried to focus on healing. But every time I walked past that empty recliner, I felt its presence, like the chair remembered him, or worse, remembered what had sat there in his place. I never saw it again, not in the same way, but sometimes, late at night, I'd hear that soft creak of the recliner rocking, or I'd smell the faint chemical scent of the oxygen tank even though it had been packed away long ago. My mum noticed it too, but we both pretended not to. Sometimes silence feels safer than truth. Eventually, I moved back to my own place. Life moved forward as it always does, even when part of your heart is stuck in the past. I still dream of my father sometimes, but those dreams are different now. Softer, quieter, less filled with shadow, and more filled with memory. I don't know what that moment was, whether it was a warning, a test, or just my own grief manifesting in strange ways. But I do know that it left a mark on both of us, a reminder that love doesn't always leave quietly. And sometimes, neither do the things that follow behind it. People often say that the dead visit us in dreams, that they come to say goodbye or to reassure us. But I've also read about things that pretend, entities that step into the shoes of someone we love, hoping we'll invite them in. I still don't know which one came that night. All I know is that I felt my father once, smiling, peaceful, glowing with warmth. And then later, something else entirely, something that wore his cough like a mask. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that grief opens doors we didn't know existed. And sometimes those doors don't close so easily. To this day, my mother still won't sit in that recliner. She's never said why, but I understand. Some spaces hold echoes that aren't meant to be disturbed. And even now, years later, when I visit her house and see that chair sitting empty in the corner, I give it a respectful glance. I don't sit, I don't touch, I just remember. And sometimes that's all you can do. Remember the love, feel the fear, and accept that both can live in the same room. Maybe, in time, the shadows fade, but their outlines always linger. Story 7. The creature on the balcony. It happened over a decade ago, but I still remember it vividly, as if it were etched into my mind in ink that never fades. I was a child at the time, just old enough to be forming clear memories, but still young enough that the world felt like a place of wonder rather than fear. My family had taken a spring break trip to the Dominican Republic, a rare and exciting vacation that brought us to the warm, historic streets of Santo Domingo. We stayed in a rental house there, with high ceilings and tiled floors that echoed our footsteps. My memories of the trip are mostly a blur now. The sounds of local music, the smell of ocean air, the way the sunlight filtered through the windows. But one memory stands out with crystal clarity, and it's the one that still haunts me. I remember the house had an indoor balcony that overlooked the main living space. One afternoon, while getting ready to go swimming, I walked into my parents' room to grab my swimsuit. I was alone in the hallway, the late afternoon sun casting long, golden shadows across the floor. As I stepped out of the room, something caught my eye. A quick flash of motion in the corner of my vision. I turned my head just in time to see a creature dart across the gap between the double doors at the far end of the balcony. It lasted no more than a second, but that single moment froze me in place. I was too young to think clearly, but something deep inside me, instinct maybe, screamed that what I had seen wasn't right. I didn't chase it. I didn't investigate. I did the only thing that made sense to a child in that moment. I ran straight back to my parents. They hadn't seen anything. They smiled, reassured me, and told me it was probably just a shadow or a trick of the light, but I knew better. I couldn't shake the image from my head. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a trick. And the strangest part was, I could describe it perfectly, even though I'd only seen it for a blip. Over the following weeks and months, I drew it over and over again, trying to capture the memory on paper before it faded. The shape, the posture, the way it moved. I never forgot. It stood about 3 or 4 feet tall. Its body was covered in short white hair. Not fur exactly, but a soft-looking layer like the fine hair on a newborn animal. It had human-like arms and hands, long fingers that almost touched its knees. Its legs were jointed backward, like a deer or a dog, but it stood upright on 2 feet, moving in a way that was both animalistic and disturbingly human. Its head was elongated, with a snout-like mouth and a protruding nose, something like a cross between a monkey and a canine. But it wasn't the physical details that disturbed me the most. It was the way it had moved, swift, smooth, and silent. And the sense I had, even at that young age, that it had seen me too. For years, I kept the drawings in a folder, tucked away in a drawer like a secret. I never showed anyone, afraid they'd think I was making it up, or worse, that I was losing my mind. But the memory stayed strong. It didn't fade the way dreams or childhood fantasies do. It lingered, and every time I thought about it, I get the same feeling in my gut, that mix of fascination and dread. I've tried researching similar sightings. I've searched folklore, myths, cryptid databases, even obscure forums on the paranormal, but I've never found anything that matched what I saw. There are creatures in legend, yes, gnomes, elves, duendes, but nothing quite like the one that crossed my path that day. I've wondered if it was tied to that specific place. Maybe something ancient, something older than the buildings and streets had been watching from the shadows. The Dominican Republic has a rich spiritual history, layered with stories of ancestral spirits, nature guardians, and hidden beings that exist just beyond the veil of our understanding. Maybe, in that quiet moment, I had glimpsed one of them, not because I was special, but simply because I was a child, unguarded, open, and still able to see things adults have long forgotten how to see. That thought comforts me, in a strange way, that perhaps I saw something sacred, not sinister. And yet part of me still wonders what it was doing there. Was it lost? Was it watching me? Or had I simply walked into a place it called its own, interrupting its passage with my unexpected gaze? The silence that followed its appearance was deafening. No creaks, no echoes, no movement, just stillness, as if the house itself had paused to let the moment pass. I never saw it again, not for the rest of the trip, and not in any of the places I've lived since. But sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet house, I get that same feeling. The sense that something is standing just around the corner, just outside the frame of vision, waiting. There was one moment, a few years later, when I thought I might have seen it again. It was a dream, or perhaps something more. I was walking through a foggy forest, the trees tall and thin like spears of shadow. In the distance, I saw a small white figure walking upright, weaving silently between the trees. I called out, but it didn't turn. It just kept moving, disappearing into the mist. When I woke up, my room was cold, and the hairs on my arms were standing up. I don't know if that was just my mind replaying an old memory, or if something had truly visited me again, slipping into my sleep the way it had once stepped across that balcony. Now, as an adult, I've told this story only a handful of times. Each time I expect the listener to laugh, to dismiss it. But every once in a while someone will pause, their expression softening, and say, "I saw something once too." Those are the moments that make me feel less alone. Whatever I saw, whatever it was, I don't think it meant me harm. But it did leave something behind. A lifelong fascination with the unknown, a belief that the world is far stranger than we give it credit for, and a quiet awareness that sometimes, even if only for a second, the veil lifts and we see, Story 8, The Mansion Shadows. It was the year the world had changed. COVID had crept into every corner of the globe, and in the midst of it all, I found myself living at my grandparents' mansion. I was 17, a little restless, and staying there while my mother was working overseas. The mansion was large, beautifully built, and held an echo of the past in every polished surface. Despite the elegance and charm of the home, I always felt slightly on edge, as though something unseen watched me from just beyond the doorways. It wasn't the kind of fear that hits you all at once, but more of a slow burn, a gnawing paranoia that something was just slightly wrong. The house was filled with antiques, ornate mirrors and tall dark furniture that seemed older than time. One thing I couldn't ignore was my grandparents' love of dolls. They were everywhere, resting on shelves, seated on sofas, posed behind glass cabinets. Their painted eyes followed you no matter where you stood. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the discomfort was nothing more than my mind playing tricks in a house that echoed too easily. But then came the day I saw the shadow. I had gone upstairs, exploring rooms I hadn't spent much time in before. As I turned a corner, I caught a glimpse of a figure, small, like a child, darting just out of sight. At first I thought it was one of the dolls, maybe tricking my eyes, but as I stepped into the room, nothing was there. What chilled me was that the shadow had no source. There had been no figure to cast it, no doll positioned just right. The hallway behind me was empty. I stood there in silence for a long time, staring at the place where it had moved. My heart was pounding, but I told myself it was nothing. I walked back downstairs shaken, but unwilling to admit I was afraid. That night, I couldn't sleep well. The memory of that motionless, independent shadow kept flashing behind my eyelids. I thought about telling my grandparents, but I already knew they'd just laugh it off. Or worse, not believe me at all. A few days later, it happened again. I woke in the middle of the night, needing to use the bathroom, which was located a good distance from the guest room I stayed in. Not wanting to walk in the dark, I turned on my phone's flashlight. As I made my way down the long hallway, everything felt too quiet. I made it to the bathroom and back without issue, but just as I was nearing my room again, I saw it, another shadow, this one clearly shaped like a small boy. It stood completely still, just at the edge of the hall, and again, there was no figure casting it, no lamp, no reflection, just a shadow, with no source, hovering there like a smudge in the world. But before I could process it, my flashlight cut out. My phone had overheated, something that had never happened before. I stood frozen, breathing hard, trapped between curiosity and fear. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes to the darkness, but when I turned the phone back on, the shadow was gone. I don't know how long I stood there before stumbling back into my room and locking the door. The next morning, I told my grandmother. She laughed. She said I was watching too many scary movies, or maybe it was the dolls playing tricks on me. I wanted to argue, but something told me not to push. She didn't see what I saw, and that meant I was alone with it. The following nights were restless. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, unsure if the sounds I heard were real or imagined. Sometimes it was the soft tapping of footsteps, other times it was the faintest of whispers, too quiet to make out, but too close to ignore. The dolls began to bother me more than ever. Their glassy eyes seemed brighter, more alert. I started turning them away from the bed each night, and mornings I'd find them turn back toward me. I stopped exploring the upstairs. I stayed downstairs where the light was stronger, where things felt safer. But even there, the feeling of being watched never truly faded. There was one night I'll never forget. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard something knock 3 times on the bedroom door. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was polite, almost hesitant. I froze. No one else should have been awake at that hour. I waited, but the knocking didn't return. When I finally gathered the courage to open the door, the hallway was empty. The light from the bathroom down the hall cast a long shadow across the floor, and for just a second, I saw it again. The same childlike silhouette, slipping out of view as though it had been standing there the entire time. When my mother finally returned and I moved back to our home, I tried to leave the memories behind, but they followed me, not in the form of shadows, but in the way the silence felt different now, in how I always double-check door locks before bed, in how I keep my phone charged and my lights on longer than necessary. I never saw the shadow again after I left the mansion, but I carry the weight of those encounters with me. Maybe some houses hold echoes of past lives, maybe others hold something else entirely. I still wonder what I saw. Spirit? Spectre? Something pretending to be a child? Or something much older that had simply worn that shape? Whatever it was, I don't think it wanted to harm me, but it wanted me to see it, to know it was there. There's something deeply unsettling about being seen by something you can't see back. Something that doesn't blink, doesn't speak, doesn't move unless you turn away. I've stopped trying to explain it. I just remember. And sometimes, in that space between waking and sleep, I feel the soft gaze of something still watching, still waiting. And I wonder, was I the first? Or just the latest to walk those quiet halls? and meet the shadow that leaves no footprint. Story 9. The Girl Behind the Glass. It began the summer my cousin moved into the old house on Chestnut Hill, a forgotten colonial nestled deep within a winding patch of forest just outside town. The house had belonged to a distant relative who passed away with no heirs, and the family, not wanting it to rot from disuse, offered it to my cousin Ella while she studied art at a nearby college. The house was breathtaking, in that crumbling, historical kind of way. The wooden floorboards creaked, the wallpaper peeled in elegant ghost-like curls, and the antique mirrors lining the hallways gave every room the illusion of depth beyond reality. But there was one mirror in particular that made us pause. The one in the narrow hallway near the attic stairs. Unlike the others, it wasn't part of the decor. It looked built into the wall itself, large and oval, framed in faded silver that had tarnished to the colour of storm clouds. Ella joked that it reminded her of something from a fairy tale, the kind where mirrors whisper or trap souls. At first we laughed about it, but it didn't take long before that laughter began to sound hollow. I stayed with her often that summer, helping fix up the place and keeping her company in the woods. One night as we were walking upstairs to bed, Ella froze in front of that mirror. Her voice was low, confused. "Did you see that?" she asked. I hadn't, but when I turned to look, I swear something shifted behind the glass, not in the reflection of the hallway, but behind it, like there was another space entirely that didn't follow the rules of this world. I told her it was probably our imaginations, a trick of shadow and antique glass, but from that night on, we both avoided that mirror, even if we wouldn't admit it. As days passed, strange things began to happen. Small, barely noticeable at first, misplaced items, lights flickering, the faint sound of laughter when no one else was home. But the most unsettling thing came late one night. Ella had been up painting in her room, and I was asleep downstairs. Around 2 a.m. she shook me awake, pale and trembling. She said she had been walking past the attic hallway and glanced at the mirror, only to see a girl standing inside it, not in the reflection, but within the glass. She had long black hair, a white dress soaked at the hem, and eyes that looked straight through her. Ella said the girl raised a hand and smiled, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. It wasn't friendly. It was expectant. I didn't know what to believe, but I could see Ella's fear was real. She refused to go upstairs for the rest of the night, and we slept in the living room like children hiding from a nightmare. The next day we tried to brush it off, rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, stress, the creaking old house. We clung to any excuse we could find. But that didn't stop the dreams. They came every night afterward. Always the same girl, always staring from behind that silver glass veil, tapping gently like she wanted out. In my dream, she never spoke, but the message was clear: let me through. And every morning, I woke with my heart racing and the taste of metal in my mouth. Things escalated. Ella started sleepwalking, something she had never done before. I found her once standing directly in front of the mirror, her palm pressed against the glass, whispering something I couldn't understand. Her eyes were open but vacant, like someone else had taken the wheel. I called out her name, and it took several tries to snap her out of it. When she blinked and looked at me, she had no memory of getting out of bed. Her fingers were cold and damp, and when I checked the mirror, I noticed condensation on the inside of the glass. But the hallway wasn't humid. The air was still and dry. I tried convincing her to cover the mirror, to just hang a sheet over it or move a bookcase in front of it, anything. But Ella refused. "She'll be angry," she said one morning, her voice flat and distant. I asked who she was, and she didn't answer. That's when I realized something had changed in my cousin. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was fascination. Like the girl behind the glass had become part of her life in ways I couldn't understand. I was scared for her, scared of what that mirror might be, what it might want. So, while she was gone one afternoon, I did what I thought was best. I took a hammer and struck the glass with everything I had, But it didn't break. There wasn't even a crack. Instead, a low hum filled the hallway, like the house was holding its breath. I backed away slowly, unsure what I had done. That night, Ella didn't come downstairs. I went to check on her and the door to her room was locked from the inside. I pounded and called her name, no answer. Eventually, I had to pick the lock. When I opened the door, she was asleep. Safe, but there were drawings scattered all over her floor, charcoal sketches of the girl in the mirror, each one more detailed than the last. In the final sketch, the girl had her hands pressed against invisible glass, and behind her, Ella's reflection was smiling. I left the next morning. I told Ella I couldn't stay anymore, and she didn't argue. We lost touch for a while after that. Her messages stopped coming. Her social media went dark. A few months later, I learned from a family member that she had moved away, left the house without a word, and refused to talk about what happened there. The house remains empty now. I drove by once. The window near the attic was open, curtains blowing like hands waving good, but when I looked up, I saw the mirror, still mounted, still shining, still unbroken. And for just a second, I thought I saw her, not Ella, but her, standing inside it, smiling that same patient smile. Some mirrors aren't reflections. Some are doors, thin, fragile doors that separate here from there. I don't know who the girl was or why she appeared to Ella, but I know this. Something waits behind that glass, watching, reaching, searching for the right eyes to meet. Maybe it's a trap. Maybe it's a cry for help. Or maybe it's something far older and darker than either of us ever guessed. I never sleep near mirrors now. I cover them, avoid them, never meet my own gaze too long, because I've seen what can stare back. And sometimes it isn't you. And it doesn't blink. Story 10. The man who wasn't there. It was just past midnight when I first noticed him, standing motionless under the flickering street lamp across from my apartment. I was living alone at the time, in a second-story walk-up nestled between two aging office buildings downtown. My job kept me up late, often finishing projects at odd hours, and I had gotten used to the quiet emptiness of those sleepless nights. That particular night, I had gotten up to grab a glass of water. When I happened to glance out the window, the street below was empty, except for him. A man in a dark coat, standing so still he might have been a statue, head tilted ever so slightly upward, as if staring directly at my window. I thought maybe it was just a homeless man, resting, but something about his posture didn't feel right. I watched for a while, waiting for him to move or shift. He didn't. He stood in that same unsettling pose, as if rooted to the pavement. Eventually I shook it off and went back to bed. The next morning he was gone. I convinced myself it had been nothing, a trick of the light, or perhaps just a tired mind giving weight to coincidence. But then it happened again the following night. Same time, same place. I stared down at him, unease crawling along my spine. Again he didn't move. He just stood there beneath the dim streetlight staring up. I couldn't make out his face. It was always cloaked in shadow, obscured by the low-hanging brim of his hat, or simply lost in the darkness. I told a co-worker about it the next day, hoping to get a laugh or some comfort, but instead she frowned. "You sure he's not just a neighbor?" she asked. "Could be harmless." I wanted to believe that, but something deep in my gut said otherwise. People don't just stand for hours without moving, night after night watching windows. So I began locking every door twice, pulling every curtain closed. Still, every night I would peek, and every night he was there. I even tried taking a photo with my phone, but the screen showed only the glowing lamp, no figure beneath it. That made it worse. Now I didn't just feel watched, I felt hunted. One night, I got brave. I decided to go down and confront him. I told myself if I walked past, maybe I'd see he was just a harmless drifter, or perhaps even a delusion of sleep deprivation. I descended the stairs slowly, every step echoing like a warning. When I opened the building's front door, the air was sharp and silent. I looked across the street. He was still there, only this time he tilted his head lower as if acknowledging me. I froze. Something primal told me not to cross the road. I stood there in the doorway, staring at him, and he stared back. No movement, no sound, just stillness, thick enough to choke on. And then, after what felt like hours, he turned and walked into the alley beside the building. I should have turned and gone back inside. I know that now. But curiosity, that foolish itch, got the better of me. I stepped out and followed. The alley was empty, completely empty. No footprints in the dirt, no sound of footsteps retreating, just stale air and silence. I stood there alone, heart pounding, realizing I had no idea what I was even chasing. That was the first time I realized something wasn't just off, it was wrong. From that night forward, things escalated. My lights flickered at odd hours, my electronics would power on by themselves. I'd find items moved slightly, never drastically, just enough to make me question if I was slipping. But the worst part was the feeling, the constant sensation that I was being watched. Even inside my own home, I stopped opening the curtains. I stopped walking by the window altogether. And yet, the dreams started. Dreams of standing beneath that same street lamp, unable to move, with someone walking slowly toward me from the dark. Always in a coat. Always with no face. Just blackness where features should be. I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, my throat raw from screaming. One night I dreamt I was in my room, but the man was standing in the corner, not outside, not under the lamp, inside, closer than he had ever been. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But I could feel something pour off him, like a pressure pressing against my skull. And in that dream, I understood something terrible. He wasn't just looking at me. He was waiting for me to see him. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I left, moved out in the middle of the night, packed my car with whatever I could carry and drove 3 states away. I didn't leave a forwarding address. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just vanished. And for a while it worked. No strange figures, no dreams, no flickering lights. But then one night, a few weeks after settling in, I looked out of my new apartment window and my stomach dropped. There, beneath the street lamp on the corner, a man in a dark coat, perfectly still, staring up at me. My hands trembled. I backed away from the window and collapsed onto the floor. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. But it was. I don't know what he is. I don't know why he follows me or how he moves without being seen, but I know this. He is not a man. He wears a man's shape, but he is something else entirely. Something that moves between places, between minds, between shadows. I've learned to live with him, in a way. I never look directly out the window now. I keep the lights low. I never speak his name. I pretend not to see, because deep down, I believe that's the only thing keeping him from coming closer, from stepping through whatever invisible line separates him from my world. I'm not sure what happens if I look too long, or if I acknowledge him again. But I'm too afraid to find out. If you ever see a man standing beneath your street lamp at night, perfectly still, watching, waiting, don't go down, don't speak, don't follow. Close the curtains, turn off the lights, and pretend he isn't there. Because if you do notice him, if you do see him, he might notice you back. And once he does, he never leaves. He never stops watching. And the scariest part isn't that he's outside, it's that eventually he'll find a way inside. And by then, you'll have already invited him.